Hello, good evening, and thank you for being here for this session. In a few minutes, I'm going to give the floor to Alexandra Roulet, who's at the other end of the stage and who's an economist, of course, professor at INSEAD, member of the Cercle d'économistes, and who I believe, I'm sure, will enlighten us in a few words on the title of this session, which for some of you, you may have found a bit interesting and curious, strange, because we're in 2026. So what a strange idea to ask this question now, to turn the page of the 20th century. But our guest speakers have a lot to say about that. Let me introduce them quickly before giving the floor to Alexandra. Ladies first, Daniela Schwarzer, good evening. You're a politologist. This is your job. You just told me that you changed jobs, actually, because until now you were a member of the executive board of the Foundation Bertelsmann. You're going to tell us a lot about Europe. You're in charge of programs on the future of Europe, democracy and cohesion. So many topics that will be at the heart of our conversation. In the past, you also worked on the question of enlarging the EU, a large topic for the French and German government of the time. And now you're elected president of the RT School of Berlin. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Mats Christensen, you're the executive director of Greenpeace International. The organization does not need an introduction. You're an activist since 2012. You're going to tell us about the need to accelerate until 1992. Sorry, you're going to tell us about AI, about the need to accelerate the processes on green future. David Laramendi, on my side, you're executive director of the chairman of the group M6, and you came just after Nicolas de Taverneau at the head of the M6 group, and you judged that regulations that your channels have to comply with are not adjusted to the new world order in the media. So you're mobilized to find a new deal in that industry in France. And you have a few ideas for the future candidates to the presidential election. And on that, I will move on to Dominique Villepin, former prime minister, who I don't need, and also former minister of external affairs. You can tell us about many, many topics linked to those that I just mentioned, the democratic fatigue, more generally speaking, the power to say no, which is your own project, your program, if I may call it as such. And also, you are among the potential presidential candidates, even if you haven't made it official yet. And you said I let the ones who are hurrying go first, sign up first. But you may want to say a word on that later on. So now it's time to dive in. Alexandra, you have the floor. Thank you, Pauline. 2026, it's about time that we turn the page on the 20th century. At the same time, we can see that there's a period that started after World War II, which was crossing over the beginning of the 21st century that seems to be agonizing. It's a period that we may call that is defined by the efforts to build coordination among countries with an idea that this coordination is going to be a source of growth, prosperity, and stability. And on the other hand, today we are living through the comeback of national interests, the going back of sovereignty and conquest. So turning the page of the 20th century would be taking stock of this transition between a cooperative world to a non-cooperative world. McCartney, in his Davos speech a few months ago, he said we're really at a point of disruption. Are we so sure of that, is the question that I'm asking you. Is this period that started after World War II and that seems to end at the end of the year 2010, was it really such a cooperative period? Was it such a pacifist period? We know that this period was full of wars, independence war, wars in the Middle East, very strong geopolitical tensions during the Cold War, and even wars on the European ground in Yugoslavia. So we knew that even in this period, there was some logics of power struggle. There were some colonial powers at the end of World War II. Of course, we built multilateralism, but we knew that it was under the American hegemony, and we knew that as much as the global south was growing economically, was not represented in the right way. So the logic of power struggle, conflicts are completely the same throughout whatever era the international relations are crossing. If we're talking about cooperation, this is a topic that Mats Christensen will talk much better than I would. This is climate. Climate is not something we can do without coordination. I am very happy that Europe reduced their emissions. I'm happy about the Paris Agreement, but we have to say that this is very little effort if we compare it to the exponential increase of the emissions in China, for example, and everywhere in the world. So we haven't really succeeded in going beyond this non-cooperative logic in climate issues. If we look at past decades, what really seems to me as a real success in terms of cooperation and peacekeeping was the European construction. For me, it was a real success, and we'll have a chance to talk about it and how to take it a step further. So I'm not completely sure we're at a time of disruption. Somebody who could be very useful is Fernand Braudel for reflection. Fernand Braudel says that often periods of disruption are artificial, and history is literally sliding from one era to another under a format of long transition. So it takes a while for us to understand that we've transitioned. So Donald Trump, for example, came to power, and it came out as an electroshock. Of course, it closed the period of free trade. But we have to recognize that the limits of the model of globalization existed before Donald Trump. Number one, interdependency created vulnerabilities in case of a shock. Any kind of shock that was not predicted, such as pandemics. Number two, international relationship or openness is definitely not does not necessarily entail progress in human rights. Number three, globalization and sources of growth are not sustainable if the gains do not benefit to entire sections of the population. It's not that the cake is bigger, that it's going to be shared equally. So we know that all these problems existed before the disruption that we are facing today. It just took us a lot of time to really fully acknowledge it. So we need to really set ourselves back in long time. And Fernand Braudel teaches us that if we look at every single period to learn where's the center of gravity and what was the dominant sector. In the 19th century, it was Venice, then it moved on to Amsterdam, Antwerp, Genova, then every time center of gravity moved around. With development of specific activities, we had London with industry, the empire, the British Empire, and the 20th century was dominated by the United States. And Fernand Braudel was no longer here to analyze it, but the awakening of Asia and China that is no longer catching up, but is really leading from a technological point of view. So me as a French woman and as a European woman, the question that I want to ask to everybody in the room is how can we place Europe at the center of the game? Can we hope or not that the Chinese-American domination are going to get tired, are going to tire out, because it has started a while ago, and slow down? And we are very lucky that to have Daniela Schwarzer and Dominique de Villepin with us tonight, because they're going to explain to us how Europe can take its place in this new world. We can also wonder if today we don't have a logic of powers that have become extraterritorial. If we think about the weight of some companies that, of course, come from certain countries, but whose weight goes way beyond the boundaries of such country. David Larramendy will talk about the weight and the power of platforms and social media with AI. So I'll give them the floor. Mats Christensen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Alexander, and thank you, Paulina, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I mean, it's a pleasure to be here, and I feel very honored to be together with such a distinguished panel. And I'm very sorry that I can't do my contribution today in French, but I hope my broken English will be okay for many. The question at hand, if we are truly to draw a line under the 20th century, and I like that title and I like that question because I think it suggests that the task at hand is not just about stopping this madness around us and returning to a golden past of the 20th century. It recognized that a lot of the challenges, a lot of the madness around us is exactly because of the failures that we brought with us from the 20th century, the rise of right-wing populism and authoritarianism around the world, the absolute crisis in international and multilateralism at the moment, the planetary crisis, climate, biodiversity, the extreme rise of inequality, and the 63 armed conflicts that we have seen around us just last year alone, and an economy that basically serves the few and not the many, and not the people and not the planet. So if we are truly to draw a line under the 20th century, we have to first confront its defining legacy, and we have to find a way to come together and renew it and build something better together. In Greenpeace, we like to talk about that as resist, rise, and renew. Resist the forces that is driving destruction. Rise across generations, across borders, on a handful of shared fights that bring us together. And do that in order to renew the world in a better way, a world where life can flourish in all its beautiful diversity and come together around shared common goods. Allow me to limit myself today just to suggest 2 fights that I would like to come together with as many as possible around. One is around the phasing out of fossil fuels, big oil. The other one is around reining in the power of big tech as we're facing it all around the world at the moment. Big oil, I think, perhaps is the one that we have talked a lot about the last centuries, the last decades, so probably won't say too much about that, but it's clear that we can't reckon with the 20th century without holding big oil accountable to the mess we're in right now. We also know we in the rich world that has such a big part of the challenges, the problems we stand in, have a special responsibility in order to carry a lot of the solutions, a lot of the cost for the green transition for the world that is absolutely needed ahead. We also know that a true transition has to be just. In our countries, we have to make sure it's not those least capable of dealing and managing that transition in our countries that are left with the bill to do it. We know that. The good news, in all its tragedy, but the good news, and that comes back to your point around, are we in a disruption or not? I think we are in a disruption right now, and I think that is a disruption we have a responsibility to grab and to use. The crisis, the war around us, the hike in fuel prices is creating weaknesses in a very solidified big oil, big fossil fuel industry at the moment. We are surrounded by the realities of the climate crisis every day. I mean, it was sad to hear the numbers from France. More than 1,000 people during the last week's heat wave lost their life due to the heats. Credible independent modeling shows that on a European level, that's as close to 20,000 we are talking about. In this tragedy, we have to find also the opportunity to say enough is enough, and this transition is needed. But an equally big challenge ahead of us is the challenge posed by big tech and AI, because I think we are seeing that this industry, providing the grand promise of the 21st century, is currently seducing us into exactly the same dependency trap that big oil has trapped us in for the last century. Yeah? We used to worry about oil pipelines, now we have to worry about data centers. We used to see that it was the pollution of our air and our sea that was the issue. Now we see these data centers eating the planet. It's guzzling fossil fuels. It threatens to eat in on all of the magnificent achievements we have achieved the last 2 decades on the uptake of renewable energy. risks to be eaten up by data centers. It's draining our rivers, our fresh waters as well, and it's sucking up the critical minerals that we urgently need in the green energy transition is being sucked into the big tech and AI rush that we see at the moment. And it is basically the same old extractive model. And we have to recognize it, we have to call it out, and we have to confront it. But it goes far deeper than just the threats against the planetary boundaries that AI and big tech is representing. It is about power. It's about absolute power. It's a handful of hyper-concentrated conglomerates. Check. Do they hold unprecedented power over global economy? Check. Are they causing unprecedented societal and planetary challenges? Check. We are simply trading the 20th century's oil barons for tech bros. And they're doubling down on an economy that does very little for people and planet and a lot for the few. We cannot just ask big tech politely to behave and be sensible. Yeah? Big tech is rewriting the rules of the world to shield it from oversight. And this is exactly where Europe must lead and have a special role. It's very clear that when we look at what is happening right now, and I trust you will speak more on that, this is what I understood, that we see Silicon Valley actually being quite terrified by the power of the regulatory muscle of Europe at the moment and our laws. We see them leaning in, trying all they can in order to fight back on the regulatory reach of European politicians. We cannot allow them to water down the rules of Europe. So let's stop managing the crisis of the past and start governing the frontiers of the future. So that's an invitation to resist, rise, and renew together. Thank you.
Merci. Merci, Mads Christensen.
Thank you, Matt Christensen. Big oil and big tech, your two battles. You have the floor. Matt remind us the weaknesses and even the failures of world governance of the 20th century. And I'm going to take a different approach because I'd like to remind us the big success that Europe went through by building an order of peace after World War II. And in my way, to turning the page on the 20th century is not a good idea if we forget the way that Europe managed and succeeded in overcoming the biggest crisis in the continent. So what are the options after 1945? First, the priority was security with cooperation and integration. Second, prosperity by opening up Europe, but also Europe towards the world, Europe being open towards the world, globalization. Third principle, the stability and the predictability by rules and institutions. And also by a unique currency that brought much more stability than we ever had before. So are the successes, were they guided by idealism? No, I don't think so. I think they were an answer to a disaster that Europe managed to find. And for decades, it brought us a lot of stability and peace. All of this does not mean that it was all perfect, and I think that Matt explained very well from a world perspective how much we built a model that is no longer sustainable. But I'd like to suggest to you to keep those three ideas in mind when we look into the future, because Europe must know how to protect these three principles inside of the European Union, but also to find a way and a constructive approach to the questions of world governance that are being asked in a different way. So it doesn't mean that today the world hasn't changed. The world has changed a great deal. It's the world where world governance that we used to know, the order of the 20th century, is nearly replaced by power struggles. I wouldn't say that the whole system is dysfunctional, but I would say that it works according to different rules. There's also a failure of concrete solution, problem in execution as well. This is also very true. And third point, and here I I capitalize on what you said. Globalization at the same time has created richness, but on the other hand, a model of inequalities that is not sustainable if we look at the boundaries of the planet. Today, we're living in a world, particularly in Europe, where the questions of power are being asked in a different way. On a different panel in the same stage, Jean Pisani said a few hours ago, Europe must learn what power is about. I completely agree with him, and this idea that Europe can be a power in a world where there are many more conflicts, systemic competition, and conflicts on a lot of questions, not only economic issues, Europe must try to position itself looking inwards with making decisions and trying to reinforce the assets that we have in Europe. We've already discussed today about the research and innovation capacities that Europe has. This is a fundamental priority to do what we can to create innovation capacities, to put more money, private and public money, in this and investing in this innovation capacity. This is a question of competitiveness, economic competitiveness, but it's also a question in when we talk about our sovereignty, technological and digital sovereignty, it's a question, it's a matter of our own political sovereignty, of our democracy, and obviously of our safety. Without, if we don't harness the key technologies, we won't be able to protect our sovereignty in terms of safety, democracy, and prosperity. And we have heard it very well. I'm not going to repeat what was said earlier on the stage, that we have two major competitors, China and the USA. We cannot today turn our back on them, but we can try to get stronger ourselves and use the levers that Europe has in their hands to be able to build a third hub, a third area of influence, and to defend what is dear to our hearts. This is about protecting a lifestyle, a European lifestyle that is anchored in the values of democracy, an understanding that there's a very strong value in held in research and education. And we can see on a daily basis where a safety partner, which is the US, is in the middle of deconstructing the rules and trying to build a model that I believe it will not be sustainable. This is a very important point. Europe is used to always look at its weaknesses and very good at criticizing itself. It could be a good start for critical reflection on what we need to do. But at the same time, we need to look at others' weaknesses. And when we do this comparison, Europe is not as weak as some people want us to believe. So investing in technologies for the future, investing in education, investing in achieving the common market, the euro, with a banking union, with a union of capital, and you have to reinforce cooperation of member states in terms of defense. All of this must be based on a very strong industrial policy and very fully European. We must not waste our time by spending money that we have for side projects without trying to capitalize on all the energies we have at hand. The development that is done elsewhere in China, in the US, goes very quickly and is very worrying. If we can imagine for a while this reinforced vision of Europe that weighs its place in this highly competitive world, Europe has more chances to approach the key topics for world governance. I'm talking about climate, that Matt's already described. It's also my first priority, by the way. My second is the digital standards, where the situation where even the leaders in the world, in the big tech, they warn us that there's some major dangers. We have to sit together as Europeans with partners who have the same vision of the future than us and use the same standards. I see Japan, South Korea, and others. Then health questions, critical material, and maritime safety. Those are topics on which Europe can find some partners, not to reinvent the United Nations, is another topic, but to find coalitions with whom Europe will be able to work together to create some governance processes and create stability and peace, and to respect the boundaries of our planet. I think I'm going to stop here, and I can get into more details early on. You kept very good time. Very well done.
David Larramendi.
Thank you. I'd like to address this question through the media, this tilt into the 21st century, because this will be open to politics beyond, or policies beyond the industry. 20th century was the mass media century, radio in the 30s that grew until the 50s, then television came up and started in the 60s, and unstopped until recently. And then we shifted into with the entry into the 21st century, between 2004 and 2014, 4 events that took place, phenomena which took place almost simultaneously. First one, the invention of the smartphone, so therefore you could have internet everywhere. Second element is the advent of 4G internet connections, first social networks as of 2006-07, and of course the programmatic dimension of such social network and the algorithmic dimension. So in the old world of the 20th century, radio, television were media that were created, share souvenirs. For some, it's a man on the moon, could be victories on sport, weddings, presidential elections, and so on and so forth, So moments that have been shared, which have been shared among friends and colleagues. We can see it today with the World Cup on television. So we shifted in this world of social networks. Now, why is it an issue? Well, it is for our industry, which suffers a lot, but maybe you don't care, and you should be right about that, but it raises another democratic issue, which is essential. So what's the issue? Is that social networks are run by algorithm. There is the confirmation bias. You see content that you already approved, whereas this tool could be an open window to the world. You can know everything in 3 minutes, each and every one of us. In fact, you look only more and more. You look only at contents with which you agree. You don't talk only with people with whom you agree. So there is this kind of technological servitude, in fact, and more you are in digital ghetto, and therefore where it becomes a democratic issue is that when you're a country, you got relations that should exist on a daily basis. When there was the television, main news, there was initial information which had been checked by journalists. We could see them each with our own glasses. You might not agree necessarily with our husband, wife, or children, but you could talk about it. You could talk about the raw material which was common, and therefore you could exchange. Today, between two individuals who could be sitting here, one to another, if you start getting information to social networks, you won't have the same reality. I'm not even talking about fake news or some attempts that do exist to influence such election, but simply your vision of reality is not the same. You won't have the same information, and when you see the same information, they're processed in a different way. This breaks the human relationship, so it grows others. There are horizontal relations. Sometimes you no longer, a kid who's 15 maybe has close friends in Virginia in the US, but society is based on vertical and horizontal relations. Horizontal relations are great, vertical relations at the time being, are being eroded, and I think the discussion in our country and in other countries become more and more difficult, and I think this will only become more difficult with AI, which will turn it into at an industrial scale at a speed that we cannot even assess the impact. So I'm not very positive, I'm not very optimistic. What is clear, and back to what was said earlier, we need a very strong political message. I'm a kind of a liberal, but if it's only liberal and if we're the only the ones in Europe to do liberals, you know, we'll be dead. So we need governments who would be less naive, who would see platforms for what they are, which are mainly predators. They, of course, they're innovators, but they're mainly predators. And France and Europe must fight urgently, otherwise I think we're heading towards severe democratic crisis. Dominique de Villepinte, no easy. There have been a lot of topics addressed, and you got the same time as the others. So, do you want to react immediately about this, what David said, or the role that the politic could or could not play in this? Crise of common, of course. It's the framework we had tried to build throughout the 20th century, which has exploded. What attracting my attention, why did it explode so fast and so easily? I think there are laws have imposed themselves at the beginning of the 21st century, and the chronology would need to be refined. The first law that imposed itself, which changed everything, is the law of rarity. And we experience that with a lot of anxiety when it comes to global warming, for example. But it is also true for all the wealth of the world. And this law of rarity, which is an observation that all powers can observe in the world, well, induces a second law, which is the law of power. Once the limits or the boundaries of the planet have been reached, or the limits have been the temptation for the major power to grab whatever is left of the global wealth to use them. And the law of power has led to a major change in the players. You know, it's not just the playground that changed, you know, but the players changed as well. Because today the main players are new or old empires, and the behavior of empires is very much like platforms. It is, of course, they behave as predators because the law of rivalry leads them to accumulate more than the neighbor to be safe. And behind this law of power of the new empire, there is another law which imposes itself, which is the law of global trouble or chaos, which succeeds another global world, which led anyway to a multilateral order. And this global disorder comes with the contestation of the rules and the way the US power challenges the rules through its military intervention, despite all the promises, and especially, this is quite striking, if we add this cascade of law to a law which dominates all, which is the acceleration of history and technological acceleration, we are now in a world without any bearings or references where everything is to be done. And it is probably the most important message that Europeans and France should receive, because it deconstructs the system which was our system, the common system which was ours in the 20th century, in the relationship between the states and the market. The state and the market throughout the 20th century had two phases: a period where the state wanted to be total, it was, you know, the totalitarianism, communism, and another period where it was the market who wanted to be total, and especially in the period of the ultraliberalism, where we thought that, of course, it is the market that was going to absorb the state. Well, we have to note that the 21st century is a total break in this order, which was that of the 20th century, and that Karl Polanyi had analyzed. When you realize when the relationship between the state and the market is going to change, clearly there were economic and political changes, upheavals, which were the results. 21st century is characterized by a relationship between the state and the market totally new, because for the first time we see a merging of the state and the market. And this merger leads to two systems. The dominating system, that of oligarchies, could be Chinese, Russian, or even American, where of course we can see the American system transforming itself with the entropic case. We see the temptation of Donald Trump to introduce a nationalism of artificial intelligence, and even when we see an OpenAI ready to accept participation from the US state in its own company, we can see clearly that we are at a time when the merging of the states changes the rules of the game. So when we look at what goes on in Europe, what's going on in Europe now, will we be capable, in view of this system of major powers and empires, will we be able to maintain a living liberal democracy? We have to find a new balance between the state and the market, which implies for Europe to have an ability to clean the situation, and for France, that is, correct our public finances if we want to be credible, then be capable of finding competitiveness in a world of power and without rules. So be able to, be back in the three main segments where the battle is done: money, intelligence, AI, and energy. So we do have assets, France and Europeans, so in these domains. But there is a third dimension, which is how can we re-articulate the market with society, the market with the states. And we can see that Europe today is facing challenges. We have to accept to become at last protectionist. We have to be able to protect our economy if we want to fight for our ability in energy, AI, in economic life. So secondly, we have to be able to, beyond that, to mobilize the savings. European savings is huge, 35 billion euros, but unfortunately it is not invested in Europe, it is invested in the US. So how can we capture these savings or these by having all the means? This is why I want a major solidarity sovereignty funds in France, but also a Security Council in Europe, which could have as an objective to assert the headings of European sovereignty. So you can see in all these domains, the main issue is, are we sovereign? Are we able to maintain our independence, we French and we Europeans, in a world which has changed into logics of power and predation? And will we be, and the 27 meeting, so will we be French, a liberal democracy in 2027? And don't we, if we give a bad example, to entrain all of Europe into this illiberalism, which is knocking at the door? And we can see in the UK, in Germany, in the rest of Europe, that it is for some the answer through an alliance between populists and oligarchies, the 1% which would secede and which would find the way to maintain itself against the new empires which threaten us. Thank you. Unless there is an immediate reaction. Now, among the struggles that exist with our guests, electric transition, for example, big oil, big tech, and so on and so forth, as you name them, but of course, the struggle with David Larramendi. I mentioned that you said, more common, but more precisely the media, in France. Now the question, European question. So, struggle so that there would be more cooperation in general way. So even I would say, as far as you're concerned, that politics should find power. So what is the priority of priorities for you? Priority is political. You understood. It is the essential for China, for Russia, and it should be the priority for Europe and the US. It is today the political world that sets the horizon, and this is why we have to be able to integrate all the dimensions, which have a strategic dimension for preservation. It's so true for the climate warming, global warming, but of course, major tools, initial competition, the case of digital platforms, artificial intelligence, or energy. So, all those struggles have to be guided by research for general interest, and at the same time, tools of powers should make it possible to face international competition. So those are two dimensions which coexist, and the state and politics have to be able to create a coherent framework that will enable all the concerns, all the strategies to be developed. There is an example that I found striking. Through the last Choose France, we could see that a certain number of hyperscalers wanted to set shop in France, and we understand why. We have decarbonated energy, which is cheap, thanks to the nuclear. This decarbonated energy will be put to the disposal of some data centers who will respond to foreign investment rather than privileging our own capability to create with Europeans our own data centers, which means that US companies, US platforms will be able to buy with cheap energy in France a certain number of facilities. They will use 4 digital platforms that will retrieve that energy, collect energy for the US companies to sell them back at a high price to our own products, which means that we are not able in the global competition to valorize our own capabilities. So it is important to ask ourselves the question, how can this cheap energy should benefit the French European cheap energy should benefit Europe and France in AI, which valorizes our assets and serves our ambition in the fight against global warming. Matt Christensen, do you want to respond? But you basically, in line with David Larramendi, who talked about the naivety of politicians versus what you call predators. I will correct. It's not naivety. They're flooded. They don't understand. Europeans, I would say, in all European countries, face successive crises such that they cannot pull their head out of the water, and you don't have the tools, they don't have the vision, because they are not sufficiently united to act.
Clear that we are all swarmed and all disoriented, looking for where to fight. And that's why my suggestion before was, let's come together on a few of them, because we can't fight them all at once. I think that it is, and I agree very much with your point, Daniela, I think it is almost shameful that we see European politicians with the Draghi report in the hand as the new Bible telling us how lousy and bad and weak we are in Europe. I think it's completely crazy that we buy into this narrative, and it sort of means that politicians show up in global spaces looking down on their shoes and sort of hardly dare to say that they're from Europe. We are in a situation where we have so much good for us going in Europe. We have some of the balances between value and the power from the trading bloc, being the biggest trading bloc in the world. We are in a situation where we have much more potential than we are right now giving. And instead we are showing up right now, which I think is not reported widely in mainstream media, but we are in the middle of the largest deregulation spray that we've ever seen when it comes to our environmental protections, the Green Deal, our tech regulations. It's all done in this Draghi spirit of we have to simplify, we have to make sure that we have competitiveness. But in fact, what we're doing is that we are rolling back a lot of the power, influence, and and achievements that we have achieved together over the last 2-3 decades. It's shameful, and it's a complete missed opportunity to be on the forefront of what is needed. I completely agree that what is called for in this moment is, of course, politics, it's leaders, it is the willingness to step up. We completely appreciate that everyone is being swamped, but we have to get the orientation right, and we have to agree on what are the 5 things that we need to change now. Yeah.
Je ne sais pas si Daniela Schwarzer voulait réagir sur la question européenne qui est au cœur
Oui.
du propos.
Alors, je partage exactement votre analyse que nos décideurs sont complètement noyés dans...
Our decision makers are swamped in daily crisis and are not able to have a long-term vision, and even worse, they are not able to come up with a positive vision of the future. And this makes the situation politically very complicated. If they talk about all the risks we discussed 2-3 hours ago, you know, there are many risks. In my opinion, our task, the political task, the most complicated one, but the most important one, is to have a vision which carries the young generation, which will lead us to believe that there is a future to be built for the new generation. It is possible. This is why I said, let's not look at our weaknesses only, but let's look at what we've done. We know we've done a lot of great things, you know. We've succeeded in many things in Europe. So today, indeed, we have to catch up when it comes to competitiveness, and especially in the domain of technology. And this is the major risk I see today for our continent. We cannot do that. But at the same time, we got many projects in that domain which have a lot of success. And therefore, let's put the necessary resources behind the projects to be selected so that we have a leapfrog, un saut de grenouille. Choisissons les projets, les technologies qui vont nous donner de la compétitivité par rapport aux autres pour avoir des nouveaux leviers, parce qu'on ne sera pas complètement indépendant, ça n'existe pas. It doesn't exist, sorry, but the others do have dependence and they have weaknesses as well. And if we want to govern this world together, well, it will not be done without acknowledging that we are all on the same boat. And it will be easier for Europe to create this world of tomorrow if we work on the technologies of the future and the issues of security of the future. And there are many who are in the digital, but also the future of, you know, of wars, you know, changes are taking place, and we are often in the old models, and we're losing money and we're losing time. So let's be honest and very sober in our analysis, but then let's work, because if we don't do that, the others will do it and will overcome us. Thank you. We got a couple of minutes before Alexandra, 5 minutes before Alexandra gives us the conclusion. So Alexandra, come on. Is it a rupture or transition where we stand? David Laramendi, maybe one last word. Do you have a feeling that these discussions, I mean, you know, which we have anyway as a country this year, you know, are maybe more difficult than in the last presidential elections because of all the changes that are taking place in the media world. Let me react to the example of Dominic, which I find interesting. If we have cheap, well, fairly decarbonated energy, you know, Matt doesn't seem to be in agreement with it. It's because there is someone more than 60 years ago decided that we had to invest in the nuclear. The importance of long time in politics is essential. And I think today that, okay, maybe there'll be thousands of excuses, but this can't go on. We have to find a way to be able to address issues of long-term topics in a more, you know, really we got to handle that. You know, we have to stop solving the little crisis, you know, say, oh, today, you know, without projecting ourselves. This is no longer possible. Yes, there is a... So, okay, so I think it's time for Alexandra to conclude. Conclusion, thank you. Two things from this panel. Major fears in political order for our democracies, the political risk that comes from the predators, companies were almighty powerful in big tech, big oil. And note that companies like that who are almost states, we've known that in the past with the company design, with their not logics which are new, but it is essential not to be naive vis-à-vis such behaviors. Second thing I want to keep in mind is the more positive vision from Daniela Schwarzer, positive vision for Europe, focused around the innovation economy. So we got the perfect transition with the next panel introduced by Philippe Aguillon, an economy of the union of capitals, reinforced cooperation in defense and digital policies, strong and European, and coalitions with variable geometry to secure access to critical materials. So all this seems to be a good program for Europe, and I will conclude on this note of hope.